Okay, Debbie, you've got to let people in now. Or not.
Yeah. I love it when there are young philosophers looks like there are 10, 11-year-olds in this meeting.
You're right.
My wife thinks I'm an 11-year-old sometimes, but I don't think that.
Okay, now I'm on as well, which is good. I thought somebody threw me out. Debbie, you mustn't throw me out. Okay.
I'll try not to.
Okay, everybody, I think we can start now. So, welcome everybody. First of all, of course, all the people who've we've been together for ages, something like 6 years, and a special welcome to all the new people today. Just to let you know how this works, please keep your videos on. It's more sociable, it's nicer, and we're a nice crowd. Nobody bites here apart from me. So what happens here is that I speak for a little while. It's a huge subject, and I'll try to keep it down. So things I don't mention, I don't think I've forgotten. I just can't get them in the time available. When I finish, then you can all have a go. All right. Okay. So, where to begin? No, not at the beginning. So, a beginning. I'm aware that it is my choice of where to set the signpost. There are, of course, no real beginnings, since every beginning has an earlier beginning, and that has an earlier one, and so on. We are, it seems, always in the middle. This hit me when I thought about knowledge and how it has been hovering around and with our discussions for a while, for a long while actually. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how important, essential even, a knowledge is to our lives, to our existence. What we know is a fundamental, linked in so many ways to who and what we are. Consciousness and knowledge are intricately connected. So does what we know shape what we are, or do we shape what we can know? But it is the notion of common knowledge that gives us a closer look at knowledge itself. Strangely, it is the wide notion of common knowledge that allows us to zoom into knowledge as part of our individual selves. There are many things we take for granted. They are so obvious that they simply accepted. Common knowledge is one of them. But as soon as we try to define common knowledge, we hit obstacles. It surely is not the same knowledge that 8 billion people have. Water is H2O, we breathe air while fish don't. The earth revolves around the sun, the earth is round, etc., etc., etc. We can see instantly that a fairly small percentage of the world's population have that knowledge. And I wonder if common knowledge can be applied to everyone in a community. So let's define it, let's try. Common knowledge is what everyone in a community is expected to know. Common knowledge must be part of epistemology. It is, after all, about what we know. In epistemic logic, common knowledge has a precise technical meaning. Steven Pinker's recent book, there you have it, Reg, title is When Everybody Knows That Everyone Knows, epithily sums up common knowledge. He puts it as A knows something and B knows it, but in addition, A knows that B knows it and B knows that A knows it. On top of that, A knows that B knows that A knows it, and so ad infinitum. You may be sorry or hopefully pleased that I'm not going in that direction. By the way, it's interesting that there is no common knowledge about what common knowledge is. which sort of proves that there is no general common knowledge. My look at common knowledge is through a philosophical path rather than a sociological one. Crucially, common knowledge says nothing about truth in any metaphysical sense. It only specifies a structure of mutual belief. So yes, common knowledge exists here, but it is intersubjective, not objective in the strong realist sense. From a phenomenological perspective, there is no view from nowhere. We can't look at common knowledge from where we are not. Knowledge always appears for someone. In a realism versus anti-realism angle, which we talked about last time, scientific realism would claim that some knowledge is common because it tracks mind-independent structures. That is, humans don't necessarily need to be involved. My view, that of epistemic anti-realism, common knowledge is never independent of human practices. So there is no observer-free common knowledge, only shared justification within a framework. Obviously, a human framework. I could put it this way. Within a framework, there is common acceptance, common belief, and common practice, but no common knowledge in an absolute framework independent sense. In other words, there is no objective common knowledge. We have been left with common knowledge, if it means anything, is the success of agreement, not the presence of truth. I now need to ask, can anything count as common knowledge if the past itself is personal and individual? Past, I maintain, is memory. In other words, there is no the past, but rather a past. That is, individual pasts. Now, common knowledge can be found as working within a framework such as cultures, countries, clubs, whatever. But in which way could there be common knowledge between different cultures, such as Western and Eastern traditions, say modern Western philosophy or science and Hindu thought, which do not have shared concepts or metaphysics, and there is no common knowledge at the level of worldview? So Western thought presupposes subject, which is object separation, object separation, truth as correspondence, time as linear, while Hindu thought presupposes non-duality, truth as realization rather than representation, and cyclical or atemporal time. So there is no culturally neutral fact layer underneath these. Concepts like self, truth, time, knowledge, or perfection do not line up. In Western thought, suffering is often a problem to be solved. In Hindu tradition, suffering may be a signal of ignorance or misidentification. Now, if knowledge means articulated propositions embedded in metaphysical schemes, common knowledge is impossible across cultures. What is common is experience, not its truth conditions. This aligns with my earlier distinction between between realness and reality. There are aspects that cannot be common. To be clear, there is no common knowledge of ultimate reality, the self, liberation or salvation, or truth itself. These are internally coherent but mutually divergent. Given my earlier insistence that what is unknown does not exist as such, I would say that between cultures there is no common knowledge, only common constraints and the need to make sense at all. Perhaps we can say that common knowledge between cultures is not what is known, but what cannot be avoided. For example, Hindu notions of perfection, which I mentioned last time, undermines the very idea of common altogether. So the difference between Western and Eastern cultures is so enormous that even when using the same language, people simply are not on the same page. This is not just a sociological observation. It's a deep philosophical point. They are often not participating in the same act of meaning at all. So where and how could there be common knowledge when the basis of each culture is so deeply rooted as to be understandable even when the language is understood and actually unknowingly misunderstood? Take a few deceptively shared terms. Self, in Western thought it is subject, subjective, individual, psychological center. In Hindu thought, either absolute or something ultimately unreal. Truth, in Western thought, correspondence, correctness, justified true belief. In Hindu thought, realization, unveiling, sensation of ignorance. And knowledge, in Western thought, it's justified belief. In Hindu thought, it's transformation of being, not accumulation of facts. Western philosophy asks, is this true? Hindu philosophy asks, does this liberate? When a Hindu says something is true, they may mean this dissolves ignorance. When a Westerner hears true, they hear this corresponds to how things are. So both nod and miss each other completely. They are solving different problems using the same vocabulary. In my book, Nothing Matters, I make a point about this. Please allow me to read a little bit about celebrities and Eastern faiths. I mention a few people, but whether those media stars care or are fully aware of the intricacies of Eastern faiths behind their mystic persuasion is a moot point. Somehow lost in all of this was that the philosophy of the East, including that of Hinduism and Buddhism, is about diminishing oneself. There is a certain amount of irony in the fact that celebrity megastars with such larger-than-life egos would advocate a philosophy that believes in emptying individualism along a path towards nothingness. It was John Lennon who, years after losing his enchantment with the Maharishi, nicely encapsulated the difference between Eastern and Western thought. There's no guru, Lennon said. You have to believe in yourself. You've got to get down to your own God in your own temple. It's all down to you, mate. I would have done that in a Liverpool accent, but it wouldn't have been very good. Well, Lennon didn't nicely explain it either. He used the words, but couldn't understand their meaning. Cross-cultural dialogue does not produce common knowledge. We don't experience meaning's limits, since we don't really feel that there are limits. It shows that knowledge itself is a local achievement and disabuses the notion of common knowledge. And crucially, it confirms that what is not knowable does not exist. What is the problem with all that I just pointed out, by the way? It was from the Western point of view. It was from me, Western point of view. It was the only way I could show it. Now, see quantum mechanics, which is so difficult to describe because we can only do so from what we can understand. It's the problem, by the way, that Niels Bohr himself had when he tried to explain what is happening. Even today, many physicists say that Bohr's explanations and descriptions were not understandable. If this is the problem between Western and Eastern cultures, what do we do about aliens? So in nowadays, it makes me laugh to see movies showing us inhabitants and aliens understanding each other. It makes me rage to see scientists conjecture a possible common understanding between aliens and us, even when achieving the same language. To sum up, our knowledge is always mediated through language and culture, making absolute truths elusive and common knowledge largely impossible. Knowledge is fundamental, personally and individually fundamental. It makes each of us what we are. We need to differentiate between the ability of being able to know, which is a human characteristic, versus what it is we know, which does not need to be true, whatever true means. If you are keen on getting truth in there, we could say that knowledge is provisionally true. But what constitutes common knowledge? Is it a matter of numbers? Does it depend upon the majority? Can the majority be wrong? Can everybody be wrong? Well, it depends, of course, on what we mean by wrong. If there was common knowledge of something at the time, it may later be found to have been not true, i.e. wrong, so that it had become now untrue common knowledge. An example of common knowledge was luminiferous ether, which dominated scientific thinking until the late 19th century. So it was the substance through which all planetary bodies are suspended. It was assumed to fill the air. Vibrations in this substance were the supposed source of light and other phenomena, including electromagnetic radiation. Eventually, experiments failed to detect the ether, leading to the rise of Einstein's theories of relativity. So is there knowledge that we haven't yet got to? Well, yes. If we have a future, then we can assume that we will have more knowledge. More knowledge would mean possibly change knowledge from what we have today. Will common knowledge be different? Very likely. Even if we cut away all these questions, we still are left with the issue of the observer and sameness. I prefer to call the observer the knower, with a K, by the way. Each of us is an observer, actually the observer, but there are roughly 8 billion observers, each with his or her knowledge. Take colors. We each know what the color red looks like, those who are not colorblind, and we can point to it. But colors are seen differently by every individual. No common knowledge there. Let's look at the most obvious parts of what should be common knowledge. Now, we don't know what now is. I say that now doesn't exist since it is instantaneously the past. That certainly is not common knowledge. We don't even have common knowledge of where we are and when. In that sense, and contrary to the essence of John Donne's poem No Man is an Island, it would seem that every person is an island, although certainly linked to other people, but in essence the sole observer of everyone else. But if every person is different from every other person, how are their cultures, countries, organizations, in fact, any collection of people? How do we get on with others if we are all different? If I have previously and often mentioned approximation as the reason we get along, I have given this some further thought. Cultural differences do not necessarily offer approximation as a gift for common knowledge. But of course, common knowledge is not approximate. If it were, then common knowledge has no meaning. This does not answer the question of how to reconcile individualism and universalism. There is a danger here, and I'm aware of it. The danger of setting boundaries between different people within their relationships based on artificial borders, based on nationalism, racism, culture, etc. Interpretation of differences based on these is problematic. It divides rather than unifying on a human level. Behind this is the so-called problem of other minds, which asks how we can justify our belief that people have minds much like our own and predict others' mind states and behavior, as our experience shows we often can. The debate is between cognitive individualism and cognitive universalism. But where do we end and something or someone else begins? Approximation is itself approximate. We humans are each closely approximate, actually less approximate, with a loved one, and less approximate, actually more approximate, with someone less personally important. As we can see, approximation is a case of less being more and more being less. In addition, degrees of personal approximation are not mutual. They can't be. And here is my almost last point. Common knowledge does work within a framework. The problem is that for that to be so, the frame needs to be narrower and narrower. That is, having fewer and fewer people who have similar knowledge, so that ultimately there is only one person within the framework. And I won't go in void at the moment, maybe later, but my last thing I want to say at the moment is that knowledge and eternity are intimately connected. The desperate search for more knowledge is the race against eternity. It's the race against the end of knowledge, the race against death. And leaving on that bright note, you can now have a go at me. So, thank you. Okay, have we got? Oh, I see there are people who actually want to say something. Okay, I'm very surprised. I thought you would agree with everything and we could go home. Oh dear, oh dear. There are things you didn't agree with. Okay, Kerry, you're first off the mark this time.
Yep, I got a good night's sleep last night, so I'm ready.
I didn't.
I'm sorry. So I approached this question, maybe a little differently than you did, because if you ask first, is there common knowledge? The first thing that crossed my mind was, do we have common experiences? Right? I mean, you eventually came around to that, but you took a ways to get there, which surprised me. I thought that's right where you'd go immediately. And common experience, really, that depends on whether, are our own memories even consistent? Do we have the same memories if we remember something twice? And I mean, modern neuroscience, ironically, or oddly, says no, you can't remember the same memory twice. Apparently, the way our brain structures memories is that we rebuild them. Each one is a reinterpretation. You reinforce some aspects, you add things, they're malleable. So it's like that Thales quote about stepping in the same river or whatnot. Now, you also went kind of deep down this road about, I guess this idea of cultural literacy, which I think is kind of interesting, or cultural conformity, and this idea of foundational narratives, which I think is really what it is. It's kind of canon that we need to know to be, accepted among the faithful, so to speak. And yeah, there is something to that, but it's very fuzzy, right? There's never perfect alignment. I'm not sure if ants have that, but they seem to have more of it than we do in terms of the way they interact with each other. I don't know if individual ants can recognize each other based on their personalities and quirks and things like that, or they seem to be more uniform. But that seems to be the impression, at least, that we get. But I mean, people are very different than that. But these fuzzy boundaries, I mean, yeah, you can look at it like a bug, but it might be more of a feature, right? I mean, language relies on it. We couldn't learn language if we didn't have fuzzy boundaries and the ability to make analogies and stuff like that. And I mean, that's where things like creativity come from too, right? The ability to not always do things exactly the same way. Otherwise we'd be very, very limited and very, very boring beings. But anyway, my initial thoughts. Thanks.
You made a very good point against common knowledge. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Hi there, Michael.
Okay, so Ron, thank you for the thoughts. My general position is that any absolute claims are suspicious. They most likely they are wrong. Although if you take this my claim as absolute, it can be also suspicious. So I always allow for exceptions. But anyway, So one your point is that you said that any man is an island, and your next sentence is that somehow we are all connected. So by definition, an island is not connected, right? So if it is connected, it's not an island.
Ah, it
So
wasn't me. It was John Donner said it, not me. Can't blame me. I'm innocent for once.
Okay, okay, fair enough. But anyway, I rather see this relationship between people. Maybe the better analogy would be fractal. So depending on where how you zoom in, you will see the different granularity of connections between people, between cultures, between societies, but there are always connections. But when we are using the terms like common knowledge or some other commons, like common culture, for instance, or whatever, I think that very fruitful idea would be the idea of relativity, and the idea introduced by relativity theory of reference frame. So it is never common in absolute sense, but it can be common to certain group of people or certain subset of culture which share this belief or this knowledge. And knowledge is never like strictly set on some set of axioms. It always implies some belief, even if it is belief in these axioms. And for instance, your example of this idea of ether that was common knowledge among physicists and philosophers until the 19th century. It was not common knowledge for people who did not have any interest in science or even scientific knowledge. They just did not know, right? So for them, you did not know.
No, but sorry to interrupt you, but that's my point. Common knowledge it is within a framework. The framework of scientists had that as common knowledge. That was my point. It's always in a framework. Always.
Yes. Yes. So you call it a framework. I call it a reference frame, but it's like sort of the same idea. Okay. But my another point is that to argue against the reality of common knowledge, it's kind of problematic position because somehow we know, and this is like empirical observation with which probably most people would agree, that we have a capacity even for common action, for common ground, for agreeing on something, even if these are very practical things, whether to build this dam, whether to enact this law, whether to protest against something. People somehow have this ability to agree on something, on very practical things. And what you would call a common knowledge, this is a part of this agreement. So people have to tentatively at least accept some common set of beliefs that would inform this common action. How they are doing this, it's still, frankly, to me, it's still a mystery. Although there are some interesting models and interesting research, but still I don't have an answer to this. But what is undeniable that people have capacity for this common action. And it's not always to the better, this action, the common actions. It can be something like worse, that can be very disruptive, harmful. But without this capacity for common action, there would be no humans, there would be no humanity. And so common knowledge, I see this as a part of this capacity for common action. And it's a critical part of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Josh, it must be cold where you're walking.
A little bit better than it has been, though.
God,
Okay.
I look at you, I'm freezing here. Could everybody please make it as short as possible? We've got so many people wanting to speak. You can always come back again, and I know you will. So please, as much as possible, sort of shortish. Thank you very much.
So first thing I want to say is I love what you said. And it sounded even a bit more radical to me, or a little bit more relativistic than I had been hearing what you had been saying in previous discussions. But that leads me to push you further, or see if I can push you further on this point. Now, we've just heard from two people, Carrie and Michael, and Tone has weighed in the comment section. And in all three cases, maybe differently, maybe Michael's is wants to argue for common knowledge, and Carrie maybe is more sympathetic to your position, and I think Tone might be also. But what they all have in common is they're saying, let's say that we agree, yes, that there is no common knowledge. And the reason is because science says this. In other words, they're making use for their grounding of this lack of common knowledge, empirical methods from the neurosciences, from evolutionary biology, from physics. And I'm hoping, Ron, that you can see the problem with that is that what is science, but it's a consensual activity that finds agreement within a framework, a theoretical or paradigmatic framework. So I guess what I want to press you on is, are you going to extend your relativism, so to speak, to science itself? I mean,
Obviously. Obviously, okay, are you saying that scientists don't argue with each other?
What I'm saying is I'm sympathetic to Thomas Kuhn's position. I want to lay that out. And I'm hoping that you might be, if you're to be consistent with the argument, the direction your argument is going, against somebody like Karl Popper. Because Karl Popper could accept a certain amount of relativism, but only up to a certain point. And beyond that point, he wants to say that it is in the nature of scientific enterprise that they can asymptotically approach a kind of a progress. Well, Thomas Kuhn would not abide by the way in which Popper says we can do that, because Thomas Kuhn is saying something which sounds to me awfully similar to what you're saying, is that in a certain way we live in different worlds.
Yep.
So that basically.
I've got two things. All the way through, whatever I say, it has in it yes, but all the way through. You want to call that relative, that's fine, but it's yes, but. And I don't slavishly follow what people say is true. Scientists have huge arguments. I mean, bloody arguments. I mean, they could kill each other if they weren't speak so nicely. But they really have basic arguments, been going all the way through history. So in everybody's little club, they have common knowledge until they get really down to it, where they realize actually they don't really agree. That's why the last thing I said was that common knowledge is within one person. Even that person can't agree with himself. So it's a problem. But I will come back to you, Josh. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting. Terry.
Hello.
Hello there, Terry.
Is my broadcast? Yeah, yes.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes. Loud and clear.
First of all, even scientists, if you include mathematicians, Pythagoras did have one of his students executed for getting too far out there. So I'm not sure you can even say that that's an absolute. Uh, Me, when we talk about common knowledge, I usually think unavoidably, given my scientific background, that it's kind of a particle up thing. We see an electron on the opposite side of the cosmos, and the darn thing behaves absolutely exactly like an electron here. And what that does is it precipitates a whole cascade of things that if I do something, I say, this is what happens. And then if Josh Soffer says the same thing happens there, I can understand it. He's got snow there, we got snow here. But we wind up with having these things that generally we can approximately agree with, and they seem to go back to those very bottom up kind of thing where the common knowledge emerges from that. You can get some big miscommunications that same way, but to me that's an important principle for doing that. My second comment, trying to be quick here, is when you mention luminiferous
Ether.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing about that. And Ron, I'm going to agree with you in a way you might not expect, which is we didn't really get rid of the luminiferous ether. What we did was we made it individual. Because if you look at quantum field theory and you're careful about it, and you're not just lost in the math, you have to acknowledge that every time you use quantum field theory, you're assuming one observer, which is you. You're not assuming everybody. You're assuming one viewpoint is how you estimate the waves, how you estimate the energies, how you estimate the interactions, and they are not the same. So everyone has a slightly different version, but then quantum field theory fills the ether back up with waves again. So in a way, we went kind of backwards when we went with quantum field theory because it made everything into waves again. And the waves are implicitly in an ether. And the trick is that we all have our own ethers. And you won't see that in most physics textbooks, but it's nonetheless, if you look at the math and how it works, that's what's happening. And I just find that hilarious and a little bit strange that we didn't really even get rid of it. We just made it more personal. And that goes back to your issue of what is common knowledge. We can't even get common knowledge completely on what the definition of empty space is, because we all have our own definition of empty space. And you won't hear that stated very often, but it's true, because if you look at it, it's some of the reasons why some of the models go crazy if you try to extend them, because you can't accommodate everybody's viewpoint at once. And with that, I'm done.
Very interesting, Terry, what you said about ether. Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much. Frank, hi there.
Yeah, hi. Hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Good. Yeah, this meeting just reminds me that this is a great time to be alive, in terms of what we just, discover and learn. I agree with so much of what you're saying. And, I'm glad you're sitting down because, I think that you're approaching it from a philosophical perspective, but, lines up so perfectly with cultural group evolution. Our species, what we're learning in the last, 30, 40 years in particular, about, how evolutionary psychology led to, culture group evolution, and how it lines up so nicely with your notion of a frame or reference dependent common knowledge. The notion that we as a species, are not the fastest, strongest, smartest, or whatever, species, and yet we've conquered essentially the entire planet, right? So how did we do that? Certainly not individually. We did it through collective action, as somebody else, mentioned. The collective action had to come about through, biology positioning us with certain neurocognitive gadgets. There's this Oxford evolutionary psychologist Celia Hayes, who talks about cognitive gadgets. You know, these biological precursors. Biological evolution just takes millions of years. You know, that got our species to a certain point where we have these certain precursors like knowledge, like a language, theory of mind. You know, the thing that you referred to in terms of Steven Pinker, you know, we know that they know that we know that they know, you know, the recursive notion of theory of mind. That led us to uh, build on our biological evolution by maximizing our potential for social learning. That was the big transition. You know, I mean, this is great stuff that people have been writing about for the last, 30 or 40 years in particular. There was movements in that regard in the turn of the century, but that ended up unfortunately leading to eugenics and social engineering. And, you know, that ended up taking a very bad turn that actually ended up causing a huge stigma in academia to even studying that topic, right? So Pinker is so famous for documenting that progress in academia about how in the 70s and 80s that kind of turned around, and we are now benefiting from the renewed interest in studying human nature. And so much of it has to do with the power of cumulative and collective knowledge within a frame reference. You know, Daniel Dennett, a philosopher of epistemology, you know, he loves to talk about maxima and minima. You know, how within a certain maxima and minima, which you can equate to a frame of reference, you know, people share a certain common knowledge. You know, uh, there's a direct relationship that the longer a conversation goes on, the more likely it is that you're going to talk about Hitler, right? So that's inevitable. So the people in Nazi Germany felt that they were being good citizens by believing in the common knowledge that there was genetic differences between better cultures and worse ones, right? So think about that as a local maxima, you know, that people really studied how they could, improve within their group. And then they look over there. You see this picture of this mountain climber climbing a hill. He gets to the top. He's about to plant the flag. And then he looks over to his right, and then he sees a bigger mountain, you know. That's the whole notion of relativity. You know, I'll stop there because I do want to, come back. But I just want to emphasize that this is the best time to be alive because really it's no longer prejudicial to study human nature, ironically, and that we are able to come up with better approximations to the questions that you're asking, Ron.
I must make a comment which has nothing to do really with what you said, apart from the fact I have to say this, when you said this is the best time to be alive. Every time was the best time to be alive. That's the only time you're alive. It's the best time.
That's
And
it.
I had to say that. I couldn't let that pass. Debbie, do you mind if somebody else comes in before who has not been here
course.
before?
Yeah, sure.
Jen, have you spoken before? I don't remember. Whatever it is, you can speak now. Debbie doesn't
Hang
mind.
on.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Debbie.
sorry, Ron. Could you let me later? I've
Yes,
spoken like in your
of course,
the
of
second
course.
time that I attended your event.
Also,
I'm still trying to
No,
formulate my question.
no, it's
And
fine. It's
the
fine. It's
reason,
fine. It's fine. I thought you
thank
wanted to get on. And Jean, do you want to speak now?
I don't want to go ahead of any.
No,
Are these people
you-
who've already spoken?
Debbie's an extremely kind person, and she says it's okay. I
Well,
wouldn't dare to ask anybody else.
why are you asking me this?
No, because you are. But first of all, you're quite new.
Bring Bill
Yeah.
Daniels.
Okay, sure, I'll go.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank you for a really, really impressive, presentation. it's really good. And it seems like you're not a fan of Pinker, which really gratifies me. I think I don't want to get into it, but very disturbing, his simplistic way of processing information, disturbing to me. So this is what I wrote down. You said such interesting stuff. It's so astute. I wrote a lot of things as fast as I could that you wrote down. First of all, I do, just have a general question. What is the functional value of this presentation, except to possibly, it's interesting, but except to possibly initiate some kind of group inquiry. So that's all I can see going with it, aside from just appreciating your brilliance. So my question is, what is, as I wrote it in chat, what would be the question that we would have? And I do think that the one way we can get to common knowledge, to put something on, some meat on the bones of that, is by connecting it to agency. And there are nothing specific, but there is common knowledge about how to do things, certain things, that people are having that similar experience. So that's it. That's part of it. And then you did talk about, there does seem to be, and I have my own nihilistic, approaches to things. There does seem to be a nihilistic affect generally underlying your presentation, and there's reason for nihilism, especially what you said about the cultures. I've been thinking about that exact same thing a lot, and it's very relevant and interesting. And a question is suggested from that about how to break through this kind of barrier. And I think it is by finding some kind of, common agency, and which of course there'll always be subjective interpretations of what agency is and what everything is. But then again, this is a kind of a criticism, or a little bit of a criticism, is you talked about all this stuff in a nihilistic kind of way, understandably, but then you mentioned eternity. And that just didn't kind of fit in with everything that you've presented, the way you use that word. And that actually, in the Middle Way School of Buddhism, eternity and nihilism are considered the two extremes. So it's hard to find a middle ground and to find some kind of a question. And I do believe that the new paradigm humanity has pretty recently entered and is pretty much inside that already, is trying to find a new way to use language. And I'm very interested in that subject. I've been pondering this for a couple of years, and I still have no answer to that, or no understanding. But I think for me, a question arises around that. And I think a lot of people have a question about that. Even if the common so-called ignorant person walking down the street is wondering about that. And it's because of the way memes are used on the internet and all this stuff has caused people to observe the effect of, let's say, overgeneralizing and that kind of thing, of tribalism. So that's that. I'm almost done. I think we should look for the functional value. I think that would be something that we could commonly, as a group of people, this functional value of finding, is it possible? I mean, what do you feel about hope? Because hope can be so mechanical, but it also, there's such a thing, there's a concept of conscious hope. And what would that be? And how would we, discover that together? And I will say one thing that does bring people together, that they do have a common knowledge about. I used to be a preschool teacher many decades ago. And some people here have heard me share this before, perhaps, because I know a few people here. But basically, the one time that these little kids don't fight, they're always fighting and having disagreements. That's just what little preschoolers do. The one time they don't fight is when they found a strange bug or a very unusual something or other, and they're just amazed, and they're all looking at it together. There's just complete understanding and cooperation. And then the last thing I'll say, this is a minor point, but Ray theory of mind, there is a psychological theory that young people don't have at all developed theory of mind because they perceive everybody sees things the same way they do. And then as a child reaches a certain age and they outgrow this, supposedly, but that isn't really true. And you touched on this point, which I very much appreciate. Most people do kind of project that the other person is thinking and feeling the way they do and seeing things the way they do. And people don't understand the cultural disparity. I think that's would be a very interesting thing to study. People don't realize. And the last thing I want to say is one's personality, one can't see it, it's built in, most aspects of it. One could say, oh, I have this characteristic or that, but it's easy to miss the subtleties of it because it's just built in. And the same with culture. We think we know our own culture, and we don't, because the way we're processing a lot of times from the cultural perspective is built in. And that's too, so that's all, field to hoe. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean.
Glad to be here.
Just a couple of things. Not nihilism. You may have a point, and I can connect that with everything because I don't think there is a middle way of anything. Actually, I just don't see how that can work. And I think that if you go to the extremes, and then it's depressing. Everybody wants the middle way.
Well, that's a metaphor. Firstly, I appreciate that very much. You're so smart. It's really, there's so many dumb people meet up. I really must say that it's really a pleasure to just listen to you. But basically, we could think of the concept of the middle as a metaphor. It's not exact, but yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Well, that is the problem. We all want the middle, and that is, you mentioned hope, and that is very, very problematic. Those who want hope we must probably always be disappointed, if not always, some of the time. And that's a very, very perhaps we should have a discussion one day about hope. But it's
there is this saying, hope of feeling is slavery, hope of consciousness is freedom. It's something to ponder. Hope is I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate that.
But the reason I put in that last sentence, it suddenly hit me out of the blue about eternity and knowledge. We're chasing knowledge. We all want it so much. Those who think we want it so much, but why do we want it so much? And then it occurred to me, we're trying to catch up with something, because we can't have the end of knowledge. We don't want the end. We're chasing it at the end of knowledge, and that's it. There is nothing else after the end of knowledge. We're just not there anymore. Knowledge and us are together. We have knowledge. While we still have it, it's great to have it.
Right. Well, if I could make one last comment, there is this Buddhist, it's a middle way schools, there are different schools of Buddhism, this middle way school concept, so-called middle way school concept of knowledge. Is there's something called the knowledge obstruction, and that is that we think and feel our own knowledge is ultimately true. And that's what keeps people from being, at a more free level to dance. So okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jean. Thank you. Debbie, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Yeah, that's been really interesting, and lots of interesting points. And I want to address especially your claim and the common claim here that common knowledge is something that is restricted by a framework or is connected to context. It's always related to context. And the thing is I think we need to define what the common, what is the community, what is the framework.
Randy, your mic is on.
And also I wanted to talk about a middle way of trying to define or not to define what common knowledge is. And I think when we talk about common knowledge, I'm more interested in approaching it as something that sits in between pure objectivity and pure social construction. I don't think common knowledge is a fixed set of truths that exist independently of us, or something completely arbitrary that we simply agree on. But instead, I think it's something that has to do, it's negotiated space between how our minds work and the social world we live in. For example, from a Kantian perspective, we share certain cognitive structures like space, time, and causality, and that make mutual understanding possible in the first place. So these structures, I don't think these structures are considered like knowledge themselves, but they explain perhaps why communication and shared understanding can happen at all. And without them, without our cognitive structures, we couldn't even talk about what common knowledge is. So these shared structures, my point is, these shared structures in let's say in the Kantian perspective, don't tell us what we know. I think what happens is that's where the content comes in. That's where social and historical factors come in. So yeah, it's a bit in the Hegelian perspective. So they show how knowledge develops collectively over time through conflict, disagreement, and revision, his dialectics. So that's how our knowledge always changes. And society and what society treats as knowledge at one moment can be treated as rejected or transformed in another time. And in that sense, common knowledge is always historically and socially situated. And so you've got, I'm taking that perspective, the change as something that is historical. And I see common knowledge also from a pragmatist perspective, where knowledge isn't defined by certainty, or like you said, Ron, we want to find knowledge all the time. We'll never get to it. It's more the pursuit, the way that we look perhaps for certainty, but we know we will not get it. The pragmatist doesn't really need that. Common knowledge becomes something like a working consensus, stable to coordinate our actions with communication, but it's always open to challenge. And it's always affected by the historical and social context. So I wouldn't say that common knowledge is an objective summary of reality, but I also wouldn't say that it's only an opinion. It's I would use the term common knowledge in a practical sense, but of course with motivations. And this has consequences also over our identity as well, on our identities, our personhood. These always change, and we are shaped by what we take to be knowledge, but we also participate in shaping that knowledge collectively. So, and that I think relates to one of our previous Zoom meetings about how we perceive. Is it something that is within us? How are we affected by the world around us? So my point is, and I'm going to finish, that I think that the tension between mind, world, and societies where common knowledge becomes interesting. And that is where I would see how interesting when you wrote in the invitation, Ron, when we look deeper into it. So that is where I would look into it, in where is it defined in our social, in our identities. And that's where I find this term interesting. So that's my
Thank
take.
you very much, Debbie. Thank you. Very, very nice. Bill, do you mind if Jenna comes in now? Is that okay with you? You and Daniel?
That's fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome, Jenna.
Jenna, off you go.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry about earlier. I just startled when you tried to call me. So thanks so much, Yeah, I'm in Southeast Asia, so it's kind of late, but
Oh.
I love attending your meeting since it's only once a month. I only have a short question, Ron, and this is just like based on my limited knowledge in philosophy. So because this is something that I also like trying to always make sense since I came from a different cultural background. So like do you think, given that the knowledge is always mediated by culture and perspective, I'm curious whether like the grounding morality in facts about well-being could ever be produce a genuine common moral knowledge, or whether persistent disagreement shows that pluralism is an essential feature of ethics that we shouldn't try to erase. And I could also have a follow-up question with that, because this one is like I asked in another philosophy group, and I think I'm not kind of satisfied with the answer of the host, but yeah, I'll just gonna try. So so is it also possible, given like the things that we've shared today, and thank you for that, is it possible for us to have like shared moral foundations without ignoring our cultural differences and personal perspective? Because these are like something that I'm still trying to make sense every time I'm going to meet up, and I'm hearing perspective from people from different cultural background and walks of life. So those are just my questions. Thanks so much again
Thank you,
to the
Jenna.
people who let me to jump ahead. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, it's very, very late for you. It must be. But in answer, regarding the moral issue, I can't see how it could possibly be the same for every culture. I just don't see how that's possible. It has to do with knowledge, and it has to do with what's been going on around you and what other people think, and morals are so different all over the world. I mean, you can even have a society where morals are different. It would be about the last thing I can imagine that it would be agreed upon, and it's a very awkward thing for me to have to say. I would much prefer to say yes, down deep below, in a Kantian type way, that yes, there is. We know what is. You know what we need to do. Whatever happens, we have to be moral. We have to do the right thing, even if it harms somebody else. But we have to do the right thing, whatever the right thing is. It's so not steady. I can't say. I would love to be able to say yes. There's somewhere deep down with all people have the same moral things. But if you look at people's holy books, then the moral deep down are different. And we would expect, I would expect, I suppose, that every holy book, which is holy, i.e., that it's for goodness and for the best, but they're different. And how is that possible? They're holy books, but they're different holinesses. So that is the only way I can think about it. It's a difficult question, and it's a very difficult question to answer, because you have to answer something you prefer not to answer, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we were discussing the Kantian ethics with another group when I asked the similar question. But thank you, Ron.
And their answer was?
Yeah, it's more vague than that, and yeah, it's also like kind of similar with your answer. But I think that they're just trying to like kind of conceal it somehow to like give me like a satisfying answer.
It's the best way. Conceal it. I agree.
Yeah. Probably.
Thank you
But
very,
thanks a lot, Ron.
thanks a
Yeah, I
lot,
know
Jenna,
it's
for
relative.
coming.
Thank you.
See you next time.
See
Bye.
ya.
Bye. William, Bill, and
Yes, sir.
Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to bring together, if I could, your notion of framework and join it with Jean's comment about agency and Debbie's notion of context dependency. Because I think the way I look at common knowledge is very simple. It's like the rules of the road. It's like conventions that allow us to speak to one another and write our language. And the idea is that they are available to us to help us accomplish what we want to do in system ways. So, in other words, we have a need to work within a system, and the system sets up expectations, and the expectations are, in fact, what we have to do to be successful in that. And those are rules of the road. It's like how you want to go home from work, you have to follow the rules of the road. If you want to write a letter, you have to write in the conventions of the grammar. If you want to write programs, you have to have the convention of the program. And that's okay. And I think it's a very interesting thing to say. What is the common language, the common denominator of achievements in systems that we have to work with? And that's the issue I see of common knowledge. Because you say, if I cannot find the common knowledge work in your commentary, if you're making a mistake of common knowledge, then I think I have a right to comment about that. In other words, Trump is not a conventional politician. He is violating all the rules of convention that we have in our democracy. And that's an important comment for me. And how we apply the standards of common knowledge to people and have expectations that they're going to comply with them is a critical way of looking at the world. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bill. I'm wondering if, isn't Trump part of a whole huge amount of people who have common knowledge of what they say is right or not? That's common knowledge, isn't it? As much
Well,
as
no,
we
I'm
don't
saying
like
it's a
it.
how to do thing. In other words, common knowledge is procedure, following conventions, and doing that kind of thing. We operate ourselves in accordance with rules that are, applicable, and we all agree that they should happen. Because if they don't, we collide with one another on the street, and we run into each other in traffic on the freeway, and you have to signal to turn your car. And those are things that are getting general consensus of cooperation that is in play. I don't think there's a substantive issue as much as a convenience issue for how to successfully navigate systems.
Yes, no, you're right, of course, but I'm just wondering if common knowledge is always what you and I would consider to be good. There's common knowledge in very dark societies. It's common knowledge, and they know how to behave in order the system to work. But that's not that. It's common knowledge. It doesn't
Yes.
make common knowledge something that's worthwhile necessarily.
No, it's not. I have no value. I'm sure to get along in Putin's Russia, you have to comply with fear responded, and you have to deal with the context of terror that you live in. And that's common knowledge, and that's something you have to deal with. It's not a value judgment. It's a practical, pragmatic way of survival.
Yeah. Thank you very much, William. Thank you. Very good. James.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. Yeah, this is a little less on the subjective side than normal, although I think you do sort of start from that side. I'm kind of on this common knowledge to me is something that spans the whole existence of humanity. The basically, at least, right? Maybe other kinds of hominids are involved, could have been involved. But right now we just basically have one kind of hominid, Homo sapiens. So, and that's basically what everyone is talking about. But I see it as kind of like everyone originally, right, before we evolved, as we were evolving as Homo sapiens, and while we were doing that, because of shifting locales and having to deal with new climates and learning new skills and so forth, because everybody, this is the reason that we, like often have a common capacity for common knowledge, right? People generally have a high capacity for common knowledge, regardless of who they are. Common knowledge spans, of course, any kind of knowledge, but I've heard references to religious knowledge, moral knowledge, and scientific knowledge, for example. So I think they're very related. I mean, the way we understand religion is very much the way we understand science, or even scientists. We could say it's the way scientists understand scientists. Religion, of course, is a system of enforcement, and science even develops systems of enforcement and rules and so forth that they have to follow. So the common knowledge evolves, becomes complex, and it's a common talent of people like us. So, Homo sapiens. So the reference to Indian religion versus Western thinking, I think is absurd. Most Indians are not like the ones that show up in philosophy groups and talk about Advaita beliefs and non-dualism and so forth. It's these people believe in God. They have a religion, but they're mostly dualistic. They believe that there's God over there and people here, and you just have to Google that. That's just a common knowledge. That Indians don't believe in non-dualism. They believe in dualism. A subset there's a subset of the religion called Advaita, and they developed this theory, which is very popular in the West, right? Since around 1906, when the books the books were first translated, so into English, into European languages. So this and even before that, I think Arthur Schopenhauer had a copy of the Upanishads, most likely, and he related it to his Christianity. So, but the thinking is not that different, but it's always regional. In other words, if wherever I live on the earth and I'm an evolving human, I have a horizon of interest and concern, and it's about 3 miles. The distance, if I go on a mountaintop, I can see at least 3 miles. So, and most of the time I can see within that kind of like a spectrum. I can see a mountain from here 3 miles away if it's not being blocked. So, but if it's longer than that's further than that, I probably can't see it. So I can definitely travel to those places. I can learn to travel, and I can learn to expand my horizons. But you always have a kind of a basic constraint because of the way we are built physically. We have 2 legs and so forth. Once we have cars and we enter into the 20th century and so forth, we can travel further than that. In the 19th century, people traveled cross country using horses. So it is in the United States. But you couldn't use one horse to do that. You would have to develop a system of changing horses, like, for example, the wagon. Not the wagon, but the mail was delivered that way. They would have stations where they would change horses, and that way you could cover a very long distance. And this was widely known at that time, but now we don't even think about it. We think that everything is close because we have this instant connection all around the earth. We can, oh yeah, we're going to have AI in space soon. Everybody's going to have common knowledge. And it's going to be wonderful. And that's another discussion. I don't want to take too long by discussing that. But, we're all going to be plugged into common knowledge to up to our capacity to learn. And we have high capacities to learn. That's obvious, when you listen to people in this meetup. They're able to come up with different perspectives, and based on their knowledge of science, knowledge of psychology, knowledge of religion, knowledge of morality from their perspective, and so forth. So it's a very interesting subject, but I think it's just everything reflects on our capacity for learning, capacity for hearing, capacity for acting and developing, and then developing hypothesis, beliefs, all that. Yeah.
James, does everybody have the same capacity?
But basically similar
Really?
capacity, more developed in the case of people who are more educated. I don't pretend to be a PhD.
So people do not have the same capacity.
Not completely the same, but there's nobody that has an elevated capacity. No one is godlike.
Really?
You're not godlike. I'm sure of that.
I have to speak to my guru about that.
Yeah, you better.
But obviously people don't have the same capacity. If they have everybody here has got roughly the same capacity, but go outside the door and ask somebody what we're talking about, he would have no idea what we're saying. No idea whatsoever. And I don't know about his capacity. He hasn't got his capacity, but he didn't learn, etc., etc. And by the way, James, where have you disappeared to? All these squares here. James, there you are. You've gone right down.
I'm here. Yeah. Okay.
No, I wasn't talking about Indians, by the way. I was talking about Hinduism. There is a huge difference between Hinduism and Christianity, for example. Huge. And the people who are wandering around India, remember that the British were there for hundreds of years. I presume they had some influence on the way people think. And I agree that people don't wander around thinking deep thoughts all over the place, just like they don't in England or in the States or Australia. They don't do it in India either. But that's not the point. The point is, when I'm talking about that Hindu philosophy is different from Western philosophy. That's the only point I made. All the people in India have their own common knowledge in their own bits, in their societies, in their families. They all live in big families, right? That's their thing. I'm not sure, I don't know, but I presume that within each family they have some sort of common knowledge, some sort of approximate, and I'm sure that there are no two people in there who have the same exact knowledge. As somebody said, I think it was Kerry, I don't remember now, that everybody has different experiences and different memories, and they affect us. They have to. Each one is a walking example of memory and experience. That's how I see it. But,
okay, but I see you trying to educate me. This has nothing to do. But my point is, this has nothing at all to do with with having a dualistic perspective. This has nothing at all to do with having a dualist perspective. People in India, just like people in England or wherever, have the same ability to have common knowledge. They all have common knowledge. Even the Advaitas, the people who are interested in philosophy and develop knowledge of non-dualism, they have common knowledge with all the Indian people that are dualistic. They're partly distinct by their separation. They're kind of like agnostics almost. They're kind of like out separated slightly from the majority of their compatriots. So that has nothing to do with people's ability to have common knowledge. They have a ton of common knowledge, regardless of having different philosophies, just like you have a more subjective philosophy than I do, right? And I am I am a kind of I'm interested in and not. We're both, but we do have a lot of common tendencies, like to have not to have a skepticism towards purely religious ideas, right? If it helps you keep a culture together, yes, I appreciate religious ideas, because those ideas can form a common bond between people. So this commonality is something that's natural to our species. It's not part of a single philosophy.
James, may I ask you, seriously, have you ever spoken to a Hindu person?
Yes, many times on philosophy groups, and also, but I know experts in non-dualism. I've spoken to expert philosophers in non-dualism, not just religious gurus.
Well, okay. My experience is that when I talk about perfection to a Hindu person, the person doesn't know what I'm talking about, because for them, perfection is perfection, and I can't say to them, but there is only perhaps a bit of perfection. Maybe there's not full perfection. They don't know what I'm talking about. They do not understand me, even when we speak the same language. That's all I can say.
I'm not sure what you mean. Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by perfection personally. Sorry.
Okay, fair enough. No, but that's anyway. Thank you very much.
As far as common knowledge goes, perfection is nice. It's nice, common, not common. That you admitted that they know something about perfection, so
No, they don't.
You kind of lost me.
They don't. They will say to me, I will say, "How are you?" They'll say, "Perfect." I said, it can't be perfect, and they don't understand what I mean, because it is perfect for them, and they don't understand what I'm saying, and I don't understand what they're saying, because I know that perfection can't be perfection, and they don't. They don't. That's it. We're speaking the same language. We just don't understand each other. Anyway.
Randy, Fred is off. Okay, there he is. He's muted.
Okay, thank you very much, James. Thank you. You can come back. Tone, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you, Ron. So just picking up on something that I think James mentioned briefly, and Ron, you had mentioned in your initial statement, this idea about constraints. And that's kind of what I want to focus on, is that I think that what we would call common knowledge in some sense emerges out of shared constraints, right? And the farther away that you can get, the more degrees of freedom you have to implement within those constraints, the more divergence you're going to have. So for example, if you look at, I always do this, but if you go all the way down to bacteria and you look at chemotaxis, we might hesitate to call it knowledge, but it's a process that they have to execute. They need to understand, how do they move towards, let's say, glucose in a gradient. Is that common knowledge? Not in the way that we're speaking about it here, but it's a normative behavior that it emerges from a shared set of constraints. They must do these things in order to survive, in order to propagate. But when you take it all the way up to beings like ourselves, as Douglas Hofstadter calls us, universal beings who in some sense seem to have no upper limit on the amount of arbitrary symbols that we can add to our repertoire, now we have so many degrees of freedom with which to implement between a shared set of constraints. It's no wonder that there's going to be divergence, right? It's no wonder that in the East, many of the same constraints led to things like Buddhism. We spoke about this last night in a different group, but in the West, many of the same constraints led to Stoicism, right? And I love bringing that example up. And of course, we can discuss whether there was any literal transmission of ideas. We don't know, but let's say there were not. I believe just convergent evolution alone, under a shared set of human constraints, having to survive the day, deal with family, deal with pressure, deal with work, deal with whatever you need to do to provide for yourself and your family, and say, wow, this is weird. We're beings that have minds, and we're constantly obsessed about stories about the future and the past that are not here right now. And in the East, this becomes expressed in terms of Buddhism. In the West, it becomes expressed in terms of Stoicism. So in that sense, now, when you say common knowledge, you would not know what is in the Theravada texts if you had only read Western literature. So there you would not have common knowledge. But the kind of common knowledge you would have is this is the way generally that one can reduce suffering in one's day, in one's life, right? By focusing on what one can control, by casting aside what one cannot control, things like this. You kind of see this pervasively. And so I count that as sort of common knowledge to whatever degree people think that's the case. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tone. The problem is approximation again. As soon as we get to approximation, we will get to common knowledge because it's approximate. But then it's not. Then in that case, there's no point to the discussion, because if it's approximate common knowledge, it's not common knowledge. It's approximate. In which case, you can go very, very far and say that everybody's got common knowledge, which has been mentioned here. If it's approximate enough, then it's common knowledge. But that's not what we're touching upon. We want to know, at least I do, whether there is such a thing as common knowledge, and you have to get down to nitty gritty. And I think that you find that eventually, as I said, yeah, to have common knowledge, you have to be on your own, because you're the only one that you're going to agree with, and then find out you don't agree with yourself either. So common knowledge is out of the window. But I mean, that's
Just briefly,
how I see it.
a very, very quick response.
Yeah.
The sense in which you're talking about, it almost seems like you would have to have mathematical statements, because at that degree, it's not quite clear how, even within the same culture or the same house, it's not even clear how two particular statements could be compared unless they were mathematically precise.
I agree with you, and mathematicians don't have common knowledge either. They're also arguing. So I've been looking for it. I've been looking for the common knowledge, and I keep on getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and getting myself into more and more trouble because I can't find it. But thank you. You're right. It's all about approximation. Everything is about approximation. Let's face it, right, Terry? Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. You've been very patient.
I think we all have, actually, but it's been really interesting. I've got various things, but I do wish in some ways that I didn't keep on watching chat, because some of the most interesting comments come up as the talks go on by various people. And also I realize that it carries forward the whole conversation. But anyway, I'll go back to what I thought this afternoon when I actually gave some time to thinking about the problem that you had set. And when I tried to think of common knowledge for humanity, and I decided that it had to be atavistic, primeval knowledge that went back to Homo erectus maybe, or even before that, to our common ancestor in Africa. And one of them was fear of the dark. But then I thought, because of the time when I was born in North London, when I was about 2, one of the very last V2 bombers came over and brought down the ceiling on my head. Because I was under a metal table, I was safe. And I emerged, according to my grandparents, saying, "Dirty mummy," and trying to sweep up all the ceiling that had come down. But the thing is that the reason why until I was about 7 or 8, I had a fear of the dark? Or is it everyone who's got a fear of the dark until they grow old enough to think logically? And according to, I forgot, Piaget, I think it was, the child educationist, in fact, logic doesn't develop until you're about 12. So maybe it's not until 12 that you overcome this fear of the dark. I tried to think of a few others. When I first came back to England, I was mowing some long grass, and a red-bellied black snake leapt out of it. And okay, it was only a moment, but I saw a red-bellied black snake. But in fact, when I examined it, it was a bit of black water hose that had leapt out of the... but I saw it. I swear that there was a black snake coming at me, and I leapt back. Is fear of snakes an atavistic memory? I have seen somewhere that fear of the dark is partly because when we were Homo erectus or that, or thereabouts, it wasn't actually the saber-toothed tiger that the Americans have, but there was a dagger-toothed cat, or maybe actually they're not really cats, animal that preyed particularly on baboons and humans in Africa. And maybe it's that, and maybe it's a fear of that creates all the views of demons and daemons and Satan and whatever that humans have. And then I wondered about worship of the sun. Do we all worship a sun naturally? It doesn't matter whether what you call your sun god, but is that a natural thing? And a night, maybe goddess. And I decided that these are all cultural, but there is a type of common language, and that is between professional groups. For instance, Terry was talking as a physicist, and he mentioned Pythagoras. But to me, Pythagoras, as well as his mathematical discoveries, if that's the right word, was also the prophet for a religious cult. And so as a religious cult, it's no surprise to me that they murdered someone, because religious cults go around murdering people who don't believe in the same things that they do. It doesn't matter which type of religion it is, that is what they exist for, to say we are an in-group, everybody outside is the other. And this gets back to me thinking that, in fact, common knowledge comes down to a private language. If I mention Dumazel to an anthropologist, it will mean a whole set of ideas, which will tend to go back to showing shared concepts between particular, not primitive, that's not the right word, early groups of people. For Dumazel, it was particularly the Indo-Europeans. And because he talked about that and then the Nazis took up some of his ideas, he's rather been pushed to one side. But he was right about various shared words, various shared concepts, the way that the people who spread out from Asia talking what the a common language originally, which is Proto-Germanic, Proto-English, Proto-Roman, Latin, Proto-Greek, Proto-Iranian. In fact, it's within the language, you've got the shared ideas. It doesn't matter whether you say it's because we all existed together at the same time or because our language molds the way we think. Now, you've raised difficulties between difficulties understanding Hindu philosophy. I mean, to me, the biggest difficulty is that cause and effect, it doesn't mean the same thing in Hindu philosophy as it does in European philosophy. And I've never quite understood, this is a limitation of my own thinking, how one can do without what I think of as logic and what I think of as cause and effect. But I can see that other people can have a totally different view of it. It's just that I have difficulty getting my mind round these concepts. I think I'm probably running out. Oh, yes. In argument with this, Terry mentioned Pythagoras. Oh, I think I went into that. So I think I've basically got, there is common knowledge within various shared professions, groups, if you like, various, what were they called? In the Middle Ages, you had the people who belonged to various trades. They would have a common language. And I think, I know I've said this before, it goes back to language. And I know I've said this before, I think it's a question of parallax and how many Venn diagrams we belong to and how many Venn diagrams we don't belong to. So yes, there is common knowledge, but that knowledge is not definitely true. That knowledge just happens to be shorthand within language for people to speak to each other without having to go into everything that a physicist or a sociologist or a philosopher said, because if I mentioned Plato's idealism, you know what I mean. I don't have to go into start talking about a cave and what it might, if I mention more modern one, any recent philosopher, you know who I'm talking about. Oh, when you were at Cambridge, who was it that friend of mine this chap who was at Christ College, in fact, a long time ago. The guy who talked about the ghost in the machine, Ryle. No, I don't think it was Ryle. The guy who got into an argument with Russell about language. Who was that?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Wittgenstein?
No, it was after Wittgenstein. It was in a later bit about language. It is true Russell and Wittgenstein did disagree. Anyway, I've forgotten who. But the thing is, we share a language and then we argue about it and separate again. But while we have shared language, that carries concepts with it. And it is linguistic primarily. I think I'll stop there.
I got to tell you, Richard, I could not this time disagree with you more.
I know, but you and I always disagree. You may come from a shared background. You are the contradiction that proves the point to me.
I had to say that.
A very shared background.
You went into linguistics. You shouldn't have.
Oh, I know you're a linguist. Mind you, I know people like you have PhDs in linguistics who would also disagree with you, but they'd also disagree with me. But they have a shared language which they can talk about.
That's the point I made. That we have a common language in a framework. That was my point, and that's the point you're making. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. Olga, at last.
Okay, hi. Thank you. And thank you to everyone, because I kind of agree with everything that was said. And I actually have and I could argue with anyone about it, about this common knowledge notion for hours, because you have to, it's always you can get a contradicting position and try to prove something opposite. And there was very, I actually wanted to respond to what was said in the beginning by Carrie about memory, but there was so much said that probably I just mentioned only 2 points. Nobody was talking about how it could be. Most people talked about practical knowledge and how it's good to have practical knowledge in some society, in some structure that just operate everyday life. But nobody, I think, talked about how it could be dangerous to have particular common knowledge and enforcing it. For example, it was said about Hindu and that their knowledge kind of different from what we have, and how we could combine it. But for example, it was extremely society that was divided on particular castes, very they were very separated. For example, not so long ago I found out if Dalit woman, Dalit is the lowest caste, if Dalit woman said something in Sanskrit, her tongue was cut out. And if she hear by chance something said in Sanskrit by Brahmins who know Sanskrit was known only by Brahman caste, if she hears something, the liquid hot metal was poured to her ears. So there was preservation of this common knowledge between these castes. And this was common knowledge for Dalit. Don't hear anything that was said in Sanskrit. And just from recent news, you can find it online. It was probably on BBC or something. I read it in just North Korea, just now, the whole family, father, mother, and 2-year-old child were jailed for life for just having Bible. In their possession was a Bible, and they were jailed together with a child. So, and this is absolutely atheist society that against any religious, no say, any religion. Okay, so it's probably not only about Bible, but any whatever we call sacred book. So, and so I'm not sure. And in North Korea, it's kind of practical knowledge that you should not have in this book in your possession. So it's I am not sure how we can talk about common knowledge, what we mean by it. Is it really only about gravitation and physical laws and I don't know, or it's what we could even fit in it, what common knowledge is. It's common knowledge, yes, absolutely correct. It's culturally defined and culturally and socially defined. And no, I'm not sure if it really could be understood what it is without referring to particular situation. Probably that's it. I could say more, but that's probably enough. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Olga. Thank you. Josh? I think he's run himself off somewhere.
Here we go.
Oh, you're there.
Wow.
Josh, do hang on. Do you mind if Roger, he's a newcomer and could he come before you? Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's common knowledge that I have no problem with that.
Thank you very much. Josh, thank you. Roger, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Josh. That's common law knowledge. I knew you would accept. I know you enough. Ron, I would not contest or I would not question that common knowledge when it comes to some subjects is hard to pin down and it is debatable. I would agree with that. When it comes to subjects in humanities, certainly I would not say that common knowledge is very well established and not contestable. But when it comes to science, and that's where I disagree with you, Ron, scientists, yes, they do. I wouldn't say that they argue per se, especially the way probably you intended it, but they would try to come up with some solution to what they perceive are still problems that have not been solved. And we can think of the hard sciences in particular, where there is a framework. I mean, you mentioned framework and also frame of reference and so on. There is a well-established framework and mechanisms whereby knowledge is well established and commonly agreed on and not contested until further proof. And that framework is the literature, the published literature. Of course, it will depend on the quality of the journals we're talking about, so that can be debatable. But once a proof, let's say, has gone through the process of scrutiny and publication, it becomes common knowledge. And you would be hard pressed to contest whether that knowledge exists or debatable until you can come up with something to prove it otherwise. And there is a very well established set of mechanisms. We can talk about pure math, where there is a set of axioms and so on that are followed, rules and logic. And especially in the hard sciences, no one is going to come up and say, no, that phenomenon doesn't exist. Can anybody deny the existence of gravity? Yeah, some fools may deny it, but I can deny the existence of God if you ask 10 different people whether whether God exists or not. You're going to get 10 different answers. But if you ask scientists whether gravity exists, you're going to get the same answer. And
Roger,
that's my point.
Roger,
Yeah.
if you ask scientists about string theory, would they all agree that's fine?
Well, I agree with you that there are frontiers where things are not well established. Classical mechanics is well established, and nobody is going to contest, Newtonian mechanics. But I agree that there are new frontiers that are debatable, and they would not be they would not go through the or successfully through the scrutinizing process of publication if they're not well established. And of course, it takes time for them to be rehearsed and accepted. But once they're accepted, until further proof, it is common knowledge.
You have great faith in science, Roger. I think
Well,
Terry could give you about at least a dozen different theories, and they're all theories, by the way. All of them are theories that would argue with each other very, very vehemently. At least a dozen without even thinking. But I'm not a scientist, and Terry is.
I like the scientific method very much, but any belief that what we have now is perfect because it's in the literature, oh boy, no. String theory has gone on for 50 years and produced absolutely zero. The same thing for some other areas. They're absolutely non-predictive. There are deep reasons why that's true. So just, I very much agree with the scientific method, but boy, we have to be careful about saying that just because it's in the literature develops its own lethargy. If you have 100 universities that are all working on string theory, they're not going to let it disappear. It ain't going to happen. It's just going to keep popping up. And I prefer pogo theory myself, pogo sticks. They're much better than the strings. The history of that one is just hilarious. It was a couple papers, should have been 5 papers, and that should have been the end of it. Instead, it turned into an industry for 50 years. It's a sad case. So, shooting off my mouth, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. And as I said, when it comes to the frontier of science, and even if it's been around for 50 years, they're trying to debate whether the theory is useful, is applicable, and so on. That's fine. I'm not talking about that. I am the people, they're still looking for that single equation that can explain all the scientific phenomena. So I'm not debating that this is an open question that's not established. I'm talking about the established knowledge. Can you deny Newton's second law? F equal to ma? You cannot deny it. And it's been around for like 300 years. And we swear by it, we apply it.
And so was ether.
And
so was ether.
yeah, well, until, as I said,
until it's not knowledge anymore. Until it's not
exactly.
knowledge. Yes.
But as long as it is there is nobody is contesting it, it is still common knowledge and
Roger,
accepted.
if you concur fully with Ron's premise that everything is approximate, what you said can be valid, because we all know that Newton's theories are approximate. They don't work. So saying that we can't debate them is not the same. Saying that they apply in the circumstances under which we apply them, which are very limited in many ways compared to the universe as a whole, is absolutely true. They work great in planetary surfaces at low velocities. Try it
Yes.
anywhere else and you get an absolute catastrophe. So it's a little trick in that. So that's why the approximation part is very important on scientific issues also. Everything we do is some kind of an approximation. We never, we have to have a little humility on some of these issues.
I'm
and I would
not
argue
talking,
that
sorry,
string theory- Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. I'm
Sorry.
not talking about the precision or the exactness of a certain model. I'm talking about the common understanding among scientists that this is what it is, and we know what the limitations are. We know what the limitation of classical mechanics are, and everybody agrees on. I mean, everybody, yeah, the common knowledge. It's common knowledge, and we know it's limited to the circumstances you just mentioned. But it is agreed. It's common knowledge. This is what I perhaps understand by common knowledge, is that I'm not going to contest it. Like the knowledge of existence of God is contestable in my opinion. So there is no common really ground there.
But it's not contestable to believers. They will say the same as you just said about God. It is common knowledge that God exists. And the people who say it doesn't don't know what they're talking about. It's common knowledge. Wherever I go, people believe in God. They'll say, wherever. And nobody can contest it. That's what they say. I will show you where God is. Whatever you look at, God did it, or this and that. The sun comes up, God did it. How did that happen? God did it. It's incontestable. That's what they say. The same as you just said about science. It's exactly the same. We all have our frameworks, and that's our common knowledge. But take away the framework and put in another framework, and somebody will come along and say, no, that's not common knowledge. But it is in the framework. In the framework of religious people, God exists. And then you would come along and say, no, that is contestable, but not to the people in that world. That's the point I'm making about common knowledge. There is no general common knowledge. Common knowledge exists within the society where you are, and I call it the framework. And I can't see any way out of that unless you say there is a universal common knowledge, which I think Richard hinted at. Has he gone? There you are. And that I would disagree with, and I don't think there is anything that basic in life at all. I don't think there is any point that we can look at and say that's the point, because you can always get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you'll have your believers. The world is full of believers, and I am also a believer. I believe in the stuff that
and
I say.
I agree with you. I agree, and I knew I was setting myself up.
No,
when
it's
talking
fine.
about
It's good.
God.
It's good.
And
It's good that you do it.
Yes, but among what I'm contesting is what you said, is that, oh, scientists argue all the time. It's as if there is no common knowledge among the scientists.
There is no common knowledge among scientists.
But you just said if there is a well-established framework, then, and in my opinion, I'm a physicist. Therefore, there is a well-established, we talked about set of rules or whatever, that everybody agrees on.
Everybody.
Within that framework.
Okay.
I
well,
agree.
And then in case there's no common knowledge apart from being bound by something. It's okay. So we agree, which is good.
If I could make one small suggestion, whatever the common knowledge is, that is what we should push on hardest to break. Because we can talk about the common knowledge of science, but if we don't try to break it, we're not being scientists.
I agree with that, and that's how you push science beyond its existing state of the art, and that's our job, is to keep pushing. I agree, but we agree on the state of the art. We do agree. Nobody
what
is
is-
going to say, until you come up with another way of illustrating what gravity does, no one is going to tell you that G vector is wrong.
Yeah. And
I've never heard anybody contesting that.
Roger, the irony is one of the first things I tell a young scientist on anything is if you haven't checked the literature, just don't even start. Check the literature, find out what's been done, find out what's been said. So there's an amazing degree which I agree with you on this. I'm just saying that there's also points where we should mount it, and I've got to stop talking. Other people got their hands up. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Very interesting, Roger. I'm pleased that you brought it up. Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you. Josh.
Okay, to pick up on that discussion. So everybody within a particular scientific community might agree on equations that describe gravity, for example. But it's in the nature of a field like physics that it has a certain generality about it that's inscribed in the mathematics and in the concepts. So if you could imagine a room full of physicists who are all agreeing, I think it's trivial. Of course, we all agree about the meaning of this. And then you ask them about their political or ethical or spiritual views. And let's say they diverged, strongly in those views. And yet they're all agreeing about these equations and what they mean. Is it because these equations are anchored in something? They're anchored in a source. That is to say that the realities of the world, independent of that group of physicists who are trying to represent that reality. Is that the reason why they're all agreeing about that? Or is it because it's in the nature of those concepts that they're general enough that they conceal subtle differences in what exactly gravity means to each of them. And the fact that they're all going to agree on the equations isn't going to argue against the fact that for each of them, the interpretation, the very nuanced interpretation for each of them as to what exactly that term means may differ. The point is, it doesn't matter for them because it's in the nature of that enterprise of science that they can work together, and they don't have to constantly ask each other and stop. Now, has your definition of gravity changed, even though the equation still looks the same? Terms can slide, conceptual meanings can slide subtly. They slide over generations. So they end up meaning something subtly different in a way that people don't notice. And they say, no, it's the same concepts. Everybody agrees and they build on that. And so science is a cumulative process because of that. But I think that's what's crucial to me about Ron's notion, that there is no common knowledge except, within frameworks. And that is that it's this qualitative slide in the sense of meaning of terms that can be masked under some circumstances and not others. So in the United States right now, you have a polarization which has reached a point where people are talking about things like soft secession of states, where they begin that the trust is so low that they're going to be properly represented or that they're going to be protected from their own government, that they begin to move away from it, to ignore that government, to reject to the extent that they can any interactions with it. So that's a profound breakdown in common understanding or common knowledge, I would argue. Now, some would say, oh no, if you bring together MAGA and say progressives in the same room, and you ask them their views on different subjects, the differences in their their answers to questions concerning science and politics will be a function of a lot of subjective variables, interest, motivation, vested interest, or lack of knowledge. So when it comes, for example, to views on vaccination or on gender science or on climate science or COVID recommendations, the profound split that one sees among different quadrants, some will say is a result of ignorance on the part of a certain segment of that of the larger community concerning what the science already knows. Now, I mean, I sympathize with that, and I would never say. I mean, as somebody who went through COVID in a large city where the great majority of people not only accepted most of the recommendations as they came along and tried to inform themselves, but enforced it themselves within their communities. Given that, I still would have to argue that what the science says has to be ultimately a political issue and not an issue of the superiority of scientific method over political debates, because it doesn't have that superiority. And the reason it doesn't have that superiority is because, first of all, there's no such thing as the scientific method. First of all, there are many methods, and those methods are intertwined with other methods, other forms of inquiry, including philosophical inquiry. That's the first point. The second point is to do that, is to use science as a tribunal and say, on that basis, if we have scientific experts who will make the judgments for the country, it's itself asserting a kind of an authoritarianism. It's an authoritarianism of a certain kind of a scientific approach to science. The idea that there is this thing called the scientific method, and that it is a superior method of accessing truth. So the way that I interpret Ron's argument concerning, there not being such a general or universal thing as common knowledge, is that whereas the tendency and grasping onto this thing called the scientific method is the ultimate tribunal of truth, is that we take third-person approaches and we lay them over first-person approaches, and we derive the first-person approaches, or explain a first-person vantage on the basis of third-person science. And Ron will correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we have to do precisely the opposite. We have to never forget that not only are the third-person methods of science derived from first-person experience, but they never leave first-person experiences. They are abstractions based on first-person experience, which continue to imply first-person experience. And the evidence that first-person experience is always there and is always primary emerges in situations like political polarization within larger cultures, where one group in sweeping ways interprets the meaning of the science and the whole enterprise of the scientists in ways that are different from another group. And each group will say, well, the other group is not interested in truth. Whereas it could be the case that, say, the conservative group actually holds on to an older view of science, which is so doctrinaire that they can't accept newer ways of doing the science, that they don't recognize them as scientific, ironically. So I guess to wrap it up, the final question would be, what can we do? I mean, it seems to me that Ron can identify that group over there, that Hindu who has a different understanding, a different conception of perfection than I do as a Westerner. But can't I also take that other person's point of view, perspective, and maybe, step into their shoes and learn that different perspective? So once I do that, then what's the next step? Let's say I do that when it comes to political disputes, and I'm able to take the perspective of that person over there on the other side of an issue and understand how they're looking at it and why they're looking at it differently, and even be able to sympathize with them without necessarily simply being, swapping out their view for mine. What can we do? Or does this not mean that we can't build bridges that are based on first of all, on mutual respect, rather than forcing the other person to conform to my view on the basis of, say, the scientific method or any other means? Is there not a hope or a promise that we can sort of offer that person over there a glimpse of our point of view, offer it to them, and they may or may not be able to glimpse it or accept it, but we can extend that offer and see where that leads us. Maybe both sides end up shifting their perspectives a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Josh. Okay, thank you. Okay, Frank.
Hi. Yeah, so many interesting topics. Common knowledge, changes. I think is what we're talking about. It serves a purpose until it doesn't. There's a guy I've been reading, Joe Heinrich. He's the head of some department at Harvard, who he actually invented that acronym WEIRD, Western Educated, Industrial, Rich, Democratic. He invented it because he discovered that when, he's a psychologist, evolutionary psychologist who was giving all these, pencil and paper tests to his college students and saw certain patterns there. And then he ended up giving some of those same tests to people in colleges in the Eastern cultures, and he ended up with different answers. To his credit, he didn't write it off as error. He wrote it off as a difference related to culture, and that he started to investigate what that difference was. So one small example is the passenger dilemma. There's this dilemma where you're a passenger in a car, the driver has an accident, and you're there, you observe the whole thing. You know that the driver is at fault. The police come, arrest him, and the attorney says that if you say that he did not do anything wrong, they'll let him go. If you tell the truth, he'll go to jail. In the Western cultures, it's very common to say, well, you've got to tell the truth. Ironically, in a variety of Eastern cultures, the answer with true fidelity is, well, of course, you've got to protect your friend. You want to be loyal to your friend. So that's a small, indicator of, what people feel is a good moral decision to make that's, ostensibly diametrically opposed to each other, right? As an aside, I posed that same question to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is clearly Western identified philosophy, right? It's not morally neutral. Those questions, it's as you would expect, right? Because it's trained mostly on English language models, things. But the idea that it's common knowledge in both places. I respect Joe Heinrich and his student Michael Muthukrishna. They've actually talked about developing what they kind of colloquially called cultural observatories. How we have observatories around the world because you can see the sky from a different perspective. Well, he's saying, goodness gracious, we've got all this now, this information, this data about Western educated students. Let's compare that to students to see what's common. There's quite a bit of study about certain biases and taboos that tend to be universal, like female incest. That's universal. Male incest apparently is not. But we don't know that until we go out and study it. And what's the point of studying it? The same point as having this group here, right? That we get different perspectives, and that may allow us to take a step back to see in which scenario it makes sense to say that the driver did something wrong, and in which scenario it makes sense to say that I'm going to protect the driver because he's my friend, relative, or whatever. As somebody talked about driving, I want to, follow the laws to get to someplace. In some places, that means driving on the left. In some places, that means driving on the right. So to be a good person in some places means you drive on the left, right? So maybe there's a point to take that statement and say, maybe there's a point to say that the moral ethic is to observe and then to do what most people do in that community, right? Now that leads to the obvious, additional moral dilemma that we were talking about before, of local maxima and minima, to do everything that the Nazis were doing because that's the moral normative behavior, is a good way to get ahead in that reference frame. But from a larger reference frame, they lost the war, right? I mean, they paid severe consequences for that, right? But I think that the effort to continue to gather that data is so worthwhile because it allows us to determine in which situation, in which reference frame, certain common knowledge is going to be more beneficial than in other reference frames, that we can learn how to do that. And then we've seen that happen, as people would talk about the science being, predictable or whatever. The Thomas Kuhn reference, he's brilliant. His structure of scientific revolutions is a textbook on culture evolution. The culture of scientists, his structure of scientific revolutions should be used as a textbook on how cultures change over time. It's a brilliant piece of work, how the normative science is, I think, what Roger was talking about. As a certain culture becomes established, what Kuhn calls normal science is people doing their day-to-day scientific work to validate the particular scientific theory. A new theory comes along, and there's this cultural, a change that needs to take place that isn't always easy. In terms of doing that across the board from different cultures makes so much sense. I must admit, when somebody was talking about the MAGA, trying to get into the mindset of certain MAGA people, I've tried that. There's a group called Bridge that, allows you to talk with people from other cultures. When the other side is so angry, and I can't take on that. I had to give up. I had to stop. There are other areas where I believe that that's a worthwhile thing to do, but I have limitations, as somebody else said, that we all have limitations, right? I couldn't take on the extent of anger of that one group, and I actually had to give up. But that doesn't stop me from looking at other things, right? I want to die having the most common knowledge of anybody that I know, right? So I'll stop there. I've rambled on about a bunch of different topics, but this is a great subject. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Frank. Very, very interesting. Yes, I've also tried groups in more normal subjects, whatever they are, philosophy, metaphysics, etc. You can't get people to change their minds. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, they get angry. Actually, it doesn't matter what it is. Could be about a physical problem, but no, they go wild. And I agree. I can't. What am I going to do? Also go wild? So I agree with you. It's just it's one of the biggest puzzles, and I've got many puzzles, as you know. But the fact that I can't get people to at least listen to what I'm saying, just listen, don't scream, listen. And I can't even get that far. And you're right, it happens all over the place. It's very, very, very unfortunate, very. And we're lucky in this group. I mean, people listen. They don't agree, but they listen and they learn, and it's wonderful. Thank you very much, Frank. Roland, at last.
Hi.
Your moment in the sun has come.
Oh, right. It's a bit dark here. Yeah, I suppose I was struck earlier on by a couple of things which have been hanging around in my thoughts as I have been listening. And um, the train of thought I had actually related to John Donne and the poem For Whom the Bell Tolls, and the No Man is an Island. And I was thinking, well, actually, it's like this idea of being on an island is a bit of an illusion because, of course, I'm a sailor, and so to my mind, the sea is the highway. So all islands are connected by the sea. So that then led me to think about synchronization. And as I was listening to the various people talking, I was listening out for this word synchronization, and I never heard it or anything even like it. And I started to get slightly puzzled about this because I was thinking, well, for anything to be common or shared or whatever, you're talking about some kind of synchronization. And if we look in natural systems, we have some quite good examples of apparently separate systems which are coupled in some way and start to synchronize. And one of the great things you can find on probably YouTube or whatever, is this fantastic experiment of synchronizing metronomes. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but basically you take a bunch of metronomes and you put them on a surface which has some motion in it, and you start them off all at different points. And over a very short period of time, they start to synchronize. And the reason this is happening is because the slight impetus of each metronome is transmitting to the base that they're all sitting on, and that then provides a feedback loop. So all of these metronomes start to synchronize, and there's no thinking involved, no thought, no planning, no strategic idea. It is simply a matter of a mechanical feedback system. And I was thinking about this as a kind of generic explanation for the way in which what we call common knowledge occurs. Where it appears that from one person's point of view that we have some kind of shared knowledge or shared beliefs in how things work or how things behave. And as far as I can see, these are all based upon this generic idea of feedback loops. So people do things, they express things, they get feedback about them. On the internet nowadays, we can call many of those sort of weird subcategories of common knowledge echo chambers, where people will express viewpoints in a group of people who apparently share similar viewpoints, and basically they get continuously reinforced and synchronized, a bit like those metronomes. The interesting thing about it is what is shared about it? What is common? If we look at the bunch of metronomes sitting in synchronization from the outside, we can see, yeah, those metronomes are in synchronization. But you can't do that if you are a person in a system where synchronization is occurring, because you can't see what is really happening with all the other people, what they're all thinking, what they're all feeling. All you can do is experience some kind of resonance, some kind of feedback loop that seems to suggest that the way in which you see things has a resonance with the community in which you're expressing those points of view. And as I see it, common knowledge is basically this idea of where people are in a community actually doing something, expressing something. Whether they're talking about it or acting on it, whatever, they are expressing some form of influence. And that influence is then received by others and converted by them into their own form of feedback. Over a period of time, a resonance arises where there is a sense of belonging to a common resonating system. Now, that's a fairly abstract way of, I suppose, analyzing it. But I think from the various different ideas about common knowledge that people have expressed, it would seem to fit pretty well the ideas that people have expressed as a general principle. The other thing I wanted to mention was how those types of scenarios are inevitably going to be self-sustaining. So we have, in the metronome example, the impetus of the individual metronomes is obviously adding to the impetus of all the other metronomes. So there is the resonance is if one of the metronomes goes out of time, it is compelled to return into time again, simply because the environment in which those metronomes are resonating is closed. So if you have a system where you have a lot of people sharing a particular viewpoint, there is a barrier against contradiction. There is an entrenchment of the fundamentals that are holding that system in play. And so it's much more likely that contrary ideas are going to be rejected as not fitting in with that resonance. So, but there are some circumstances in which that can change. And if it's changed sufficiently strongly, it might change the entire way in which people think. A quite good example is in Julius Caesar. I don't know if you've read the fantastic play by Shakespeare, but there is an epic scene where after Julius Caesar is murdered or killed, sacrificed, whichever point of view you like to approach it, first of all, Brutus, the leader of the conspirators, talks to the mob in the marketplace and explains why he did the thing he did, and all the mob are going, oh, this guy's fantastic, he's the savior of Rome and all the rest of it. And then, having left the mob in this state of exhilarated passion for revolt, Mark Antony comes along and through a beautifully constructed speech, and it really is a masterpiece of English literature and imaginative creative writing, completely flips the mob on its head and ingeniously changes the platform upon which they are seeing how this event has occurred. And what he does, he subtly introduces new pieces of information that stick to the people concerned, and bang, up it goes the other way up. So I think that's a beautiful example of this this process in action. So I think that's probably all I got to say about it. So I just thought I'd mention this idea. Well, I would say one other thing is that you look around nature, natural systems, you see synchronization everywhere. It doesn't depend upon theories. It doesn't depend upon people, people being persuaded. It doesn't depend on any of those things. It is simply feedback loops. Okay.
Most famous line from that play, "Et tu, Brutus."
Yeah. Roland, thank you very much. I'm just wondering that that when people agree, what about the people who don't? Who don't? Where does it come from? There must be something beneath there that gets certain people to agree and others not to agree. If you have metronomes and they're not on the same basis, they will not synchronize, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. If you have structural differences between the things that are attempting to synchronize, they may well not synchronize. Although in other situations they will. So, for example, we have ecosystems that contain multiple different types of life form, and yet they can not so much synchronize in terms of do exactly the same thing, but operate within a resonant cycle, as it were. But I agree with you that if you have, for that idea I'm talking about to work, you have to have a certain amount of commonality between the structures that are synchronizing. But it doesn't have to be exactly the same. I mean, I can take a tuning fork and stick it on my, an A tuning fork and stick it on my violin, and the A string will vibrate. That's two different things altogether. And yet they still resonate together because they operate at the same natural frequency. So I think it's. I mean that there is a sort of corollary to that, which is that you could say that a sort of a larger resonance, the constraining resonance, as it were, operates as a filter, filtering out those things that don't match it. So it's a very organic idea. But the thing I like about it is that it doesn't share the digital quality of ideas. It's not about ideas, it's about behaviors and how behaviors influence people. Not just people, things as well, obviously, and how those things then influence people. So it's a much more, as I see it, a much deeper level of explanation than one that is based on people just working with ideas and filters.
Okay, thank you very much, Ron. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Jean, you're back on again.
Yes, and wow, this is a wonderful group. You're very smart people here, and it's my honor and my pleasure to be able to participate here. So I didn't know how interesting this was going to be, and I just had a very small notebook. The pages weren't large enough, and so please bear with me. But first I want to say, and I think this resonates with what the person who just spoke shared, with what you shared, Richard, is I think the physicist guy left, guys. I'm not sure if they're still here or not. But anyway, I'm not a physicist at all, but I have thought about some of these concepts. And what's interesting about the universal theory is that the reason, I mean, it's pretty obvious to me, I think anybody could figure this out. The reason they don't have a universal theory is that they don't have a way to write down or represent absolute zero. It just can't be done. So that's interesting in itself. And then another thing that I didn't mention before is you brought in the concept, the OP, I forget your name, Tom, or whatever your name is. Thank you you brought in the concept of framing. And I think that's very interesting, making frameworks. And the person who just spoke about the vibrational quality. So there's a different realm of experience that both philosophy and science has not been able to factor in yet, but both areas are starting to be interested in that. I think physics has been, some physicists were interested in that since the 90s. And that is how to factor in subjective perception, or quales, and the symbolic, well, in Buddhism and in the Middle Way School of Buddhism, the symbolism for that, they call it the color blue. So it's subjective perception. And I personally am interested in photonic crystals, and especially gluons. But the thing is, though it may not be able to write down, we can't write down a universal theory, something to at least consider from a poetic or metaphorical sense is we may be able to act it out. And that's interesting in itself, because acting it out, like if somebody's empathetic and another person's suffering, then by acting out that empathy, there is common knowledge that's of a different, let's say, I don't want the word higher, blah, blah, but of a different, a more expansive and creative and generative order. So I wanted to share that. And then we do have to watch out, and most people don't realize this, especially scientists. We have to watch out, but not just scientists. We have to watch out for literalism. And some of these aspects, it's a natural aspect of brain function to verify, or let's say to constate subjectively or objectively this or this kind of fact. And that's just a natural way the brain works. Another aspect of brain function is to generalize. And they call it, and they used to write about it a lot in the 90s, they call it big bite, or it's right brain function, you know. So a lot of study has been to that. And then there's comprehensive brain functioning, which does rely on the discard or I guess is called synaptic pruning, or the omission of certain kinds of data that's irrelevant to the present context and one's subjective and or somewhat objective interpretation of it. So that there has to be that kind of comprehensive data processing, but literally any of these aspects can take a person, even comprehensive data processing, can take a person over and lead to distortion and the inability to act in such a way that it does affect other people in a productive way. So this leads us to the concept, these notes are very confused, that basically, and this is generally speaking, I think it's common knowledge, if you think about it, or at least we can all agree that everyone wants to be happy, or that's how they put it in the Middle Way School of Buddhism. I have a problem with the word happy, but everyone wants to feel good and not to suffer. And even somebody who's on sex or something does want to suffer. That is pleasure. So there's a line between pain and pleasure, which is interesting in terms of further developing conscience. And so people want to find a way of framing things. They don't want to find it. That's the problem. But it's possible to find, there are different approaches to framing that can allow for more freedom of movement, of actual self-expression that will affect other people. And I think the symbolism, the religious symbolism for that, and all the major religions of humanity is dance. There's other symbols for it, or spontaneity would be a good word for it. Another word, there's different words. So I just think it's important to investigate, to try to question. That's where people can come together. And sorry, I'm almost done, but let me just look at my notes. I probably missed something important. I know what I wanted to say is there's also at least something to consider, as well as common knowledge. There's such a thing as uncommon knowledge. It's knowledge that not everyone has, and that the person who has it may very well not want other people to have. So that's just a different way of looking at the situation. Like if I have common knowledge that there's a certain item in a certain store that's very wonderful, this is putting it on a very crude level, not an intellectual. If there's something that's very wonderful, some product that I'm not going to tell, if I write a thing on Nextdoor Neighbor, that's an app in the United States, I think you have it in Canada too, about this one place that has this item, I won't be able to get the item myself. Now that's a very crude way to put it. But there's also, in terms of human development, human understanding, there's such a thing as uncommon knowledge. Like there's certain knowledge that many people think is important. In my opinion, a lot of what they think is important isn't important, if I even know about what it is, but they don't want AI to have this knowledge, okay? And there's knowledge that people don't want in the United States, don't want Russians to have. So we have to also look at it from that perspective. And that leaves the empty space. And that is where I think creation, I never thought of this before, where creation flowers. The word flower, that's a Krishnamurti, don't read him, what a dumb person. I've spent decades on him, and that's because I was so stupid. And John Lennon, what he said to the OP, what John Lennon said, he just was literally, I'm not just making this up, he was actually just mimicking Krishnamurti, who misled so many people. And what you said about, somebody said there's no exact now. He said this famous saying, the future is now. That's a dumb bullshit saying, which I both thought was so clever when I was younger. So we can change and our understanding can expand. And we don't know what's going to happen next. We're looking at a bug together, or something strange, a bug. a bug is a symbolic, it's not just an actual bug, but it can be a metaphor for things that don't quite work, that could work better. And it's fascinating. And we just don't want to get mesmerized by that fascination. But I think if we go outside the box and we learn, framing is such an interesting subject. I spent in the last 6 months, that was my main subject of interest. And I wish I could say more. I don't want to use up, any more time though. So this is
thank you very much, Jean.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. James. Oh, hello there.
All right, thank you. So I guess I was thinking about AI, and which is pretty important to me. I'm doing a lot of stuff with AI, very selfishly. I'm just basically picking up bits and pieces of science that are important to me that I missed. I didn't take physics in high school, for example, but I have this great interest in physics, so and biology too. So I'm picking up my knowledge of electricity and things like that. Any holes, holes that I have, patching up some holes. But this I think AI really relates to this discussion quite a bit, because AI is about common knowledge, even if it gets it wrong, like ChatGPT trying to always form a majority belief, maybe if it doesn't know anything about you, it might even suspect you're a Christian, or if you ask a question that's controversial, it'll always give you the standard answer without saying there's two sides to that this is a controversial point between nations, for example. And this reminds me of religion, like we have this religion, where you're supposed to do virtuous acts, but base it in the Jewish law, or laws followed by Jews, or the specific Jewish laws, whatever. But that makes you a good person if you do that. Whatever is kind of like expected of you by having a society where a certain social context you live in, like a Muslim context, or whatever, expected to follow the beliefs of the majority that you live among, and you're always reminded to follow those beliefs. Do you believe in one God? What is your point of view? Does it match the standard point of view? Or should I class you as a suspicious person? So you're under a lot of pressure to conform. So a lot of what is considered common knowledge has nothing really to do with truth. It's just simply ideas that are imposed on one because of context. So the context you live in, and that applies to Westerners just as it applies to people who are living in religious dominated lives, like in the medieval Europe with the Catholic religion of the medieval Europe, or with the ancient religions, or with the Muslim religion of Islamic states, the states that are Muslim dominant. So I think that there's no knowledge that is consistent, and that is entirely consistent, that is not, can't be expected to evolve, that can't be expected to possibly change over time. I'm open to each knowledge group remaining sovereign. In other words, we could have Christian religion extending as a dominant religion into the future. We could have Islam the same way. In India may always be Hindu. and may become more Hindu than we recognize it as being now. So these religions can wax and wane, or these ideas or common knowledges, right? These common principles can wax and wane in history, not just decrease, but also increase. And the one, that some of the educated people would prefer, oh yeah, we should have scientific knowledge at the highest to be understood as the highest. But that isn't common. That isn't universally agreed. That's only agreed to in universities, for example. It's not necessarily agreed to in every nation. So yeah. So I see this as a test. What somebody was talking about, the measuring, the tracing the movements of the shared knowledge can be a way of gaining insight into how that knowledge moves about and how it will tend to evolve in the future, and what kinds of social currents cause that knowledge, that common knowledge of social groups, to change and evolve. And we can follow that. It can be a very, maybe there should be a name for that science, the movement of common knowledge, how it is diverse and how it multiplies and divides and augments and diminishes and so on.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you. Michael, hi there.
Hi. Many interesting comments, but I especially appreciated what Roland mentioned about the importance of resonance, or as he called it, synchronization. And this is really an important and ubiquitous process that many systems exploit, including human, social systems, biological systems. So this is an important way how the systems actually become the systems, I would say. But you also have something to synchronize. You need some physical or biological or physiological even and psychological processes that can develop this synchrony. And so what I want to comment is that although some people mentioned it, but maybe we did not discuss it as much, is how are we arriving to what we call a common knowledge? So how does it happen practically? And the way as I see it, so one critical stage of this process is by developing trust between people, which can start very early in our lives, from families, from this instinctive trust first to parents, then to peers, and to our small groups. And this is how we learn how we develop this common lens through to see the world, and how we develop this synchronization between our worldviews. That does not deny that still there are big individual differences persist. But still, this is how this common frames are developed. And then they can expand, of course. Then the way how they can expand, how they cannot expand, this also depends on, as someone mentioned, if you try to, James probably, that if you try to talk to people who are very angry, who have very strong emotions, and if you are not on the wavelength, so to say, you basically have two choices. Either you have to accept their view and get along with the emotions, or you have to disengage. Because you cannot develop trust that would break through these strong emotions, especially if they are around completely different views of the same subject. But then the next step, okay, so you have trust to some people or to some group of people or institution or whatever. Then how can we agree on something what we call facts? And then, of course, there are some facts that, as we learn at school, that we can experimentally verify. But even before we agree to do these experiments, we have to have trust to our teachers, to textbooks, and basically to science overall. Because, say, if you're a religious person, you may just reject this whole approach for seeking the truth. So this is one way. Then I have to differentiate between facts and value judgments. For instance, Ron, what you said that there is a huge difference between, say, Hinduism and Christianity, that's a value judgment. That is not a fact. Because you did not define what is huge. How can we agree? Is it huge? Is it large? Is it of moderate size? Is it important, but not really that a big deal? So this is a value judgment. But we still have this ability to start from these value judgments and agree that some of them can be considered as facts. And how we do this, in my opinion, still the critical process in this is through developing trust to other people, to each other, and through them trust to certain procedures that we are using to establish these facts. And this becomes more and more difficult now when we are getting many facts from, say, social media, from many unreliable sources, and it becomes difficult even to agree on procedures how to evaluate these facts, how to do fact-checking, for instance. And AI makes it even more complicated. And by the way, Ron, you mentioned that maybe you'd like to have some discussion for AI. I would very much appreciate it because it becomes a very important topic. But anyway, I still believe that this developing trust for between people and for institutions, that's critical for our search for knowledge and establishing knowledge, and critical for democracy, and critical for survival of humanity as a whole, especially in the age of AI and all these things. So let me stop at this, but thank you for this discussion.
Thank you very much, Michael. I like the thing about trust. Maybe we should have a discussion about it. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Roger.
Thank you. And thank you for challenging what I said. And now I'm going to kind of push back.
Okay.
But I'll just before responding to what you said, Ron, I'll respond briefly to what Josh was alluding to. As scientists in general, we try to do our best with the tools that we have. as physicists, we try, we have laws that we kind of swear by. It's not that we do not question them, but they work so well and they've served so much over almost the centuries that, I mean, many purposes, and allowed us to do so many things. And I'm talking about conservation of mass, conservation of energy, the second law of thermodynamics, and so on. These are laws that work very well. Not that we do not contest them, but these are the tools available and we use them. And so we're unified in a sense about the usefulness of these laws, these tools. We can build airplanes and so on. Examples abound, of course. So that's in response to a bit what Josh was alluding to. I agree with you, Ron, that if you take a sample if you walk in a church, in a Catholic church, let's say, and you say, do you guys believe in heaven? You're going to get 9 out of 10 probably saying, yes, we believe in heaven. But that's not the kind of common knowledge we're talking about. I think when we define common, it has to be an unbiased sample. That means if I take a sample out of the entire world and say, let's say 10 people or 100 people, whatever, a sample, and ask, do you guys believe in heaven? So probably you're going to get a minority saying yes. But if you roll a ball on the floor and you see it stopped and ask the same sample, what do you think has made that ball stop? Probably 9 out of 10 are going to say friction. So to me, when it comes to some basic facts, and we're talking scientific facts, it's common knowledge. But when it comes to humanities, the areas are murkier, and it's so much more difficult to prove whether heaven exists or life after death, and so on. So that's kind of my point, and that the sample has to be unbiased and random. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. If you go to the Amazon jungle and you roll a ball down and you ask people around you, why did that ball stop? Do you think you're going to get, how many people are going to say friction?
Well, they may not say friction, but they will understand that there is some kind of a dissipative force that has slowed it down.
Well, obviously. I mean, that's common knowledge. Those words that you used, what do they mean to somebody in the jungle?
No, but
it stopped. Maybe God stopped it. You know, there are more people who believe in heaven than don't in the whole world. What is unbiased? Where is the unbiased? The unbiased is what you believe to be true. That's unbiased. And unbiased in the jungle is what they believe to be true. There is no unbiased. You've got 8 billion people. Where are you going to find the unbiased people to agree with you? There'll be an enormous minority. So where is, I don't understand why you're moving away from, and you keep on saying, if you get a group of scientists that agree, then you've got common knowledge. And I keep on saying the same thing. You've got a framework and you've got scientists that believe in something and they'll believe in that. You've got other scientists who don't believe it, they'll believe in that. Where's the common knowledge? The common knowledge is in both, according to the framework. And it's what I've been saying all the time. And you can't talk about how many people are doing it. There's 8 billion people here in this planet, roughly, and there are most probably 6 billion who believe in some sort of religion. So that's common knowledge, right? But it isn't. It's common knowledge for those 6 billion people. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying anything else. And we are agreeing. Why don't you want to agree? We are agreeing.
It's just that the sample I'm choosing
Ah,
is random
that's
and
it.
transcends nations.
What you're choosing, I agree with you. What you're choosing is random. What you're choosing. Go into the jungle and choose there.
No, but that's biased. That's under special conditions.
And yours isn't.
And mine, I'm saying, pick up a Chinese, pick up an Indian, pick up somebody from Amazon, Brazil, and so on, and ask the question, why does the ball stop?
Anybody.
Yeah. Not from a specific, context.
You go
Like scientist. I'm not saying, I agree with you that if I choose a sample of scientists, of course they're going to say, yeah, this is common knowledge. But I'm saying the common man everywhere in the world will say, yeah, if I drop an apple, it'll fall to the floor. Therefore, yeah, I kind of understand there is gravity.
That's
And
common
for me,
knowledge.
that's common. But yeah.
And before gravity was known about, what happened then?
Well, you know what, to tell you the truth, even today, we cannot explain what gravity is.
Exactly. I'm with you on that. You see, I tell you, we agree all the way through. Roger, we agree. By the way, I always forget to mention this in the beginning. There's a video of this and all the other ones on YouTube. So if any of you, if you all got your correct names, I will contact you, because sometimes people change their names. Anyway, you can see it all again. You can sit for 3 hours and watch this or any part you want. Roger, we agree. So seriously, we agree.
I'm sure we agree.
Which is great.
Yeah, it's just, I didn't expect that we would not agree.
But
it's
I
just
agree.
a matter perhaps of pitching the idea or interpreting what we're trying
I
to say.
agree. But we too have common knowledge, right?
Mhm.
There you have it. Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you. I hope to see you next time.
Yes, you will.
Josh, you're finishing off the day here.
I just finished my warm up. Now I'm ready
go.
I'm going to have to find a 24-hour meetup after this one ends.
Okay.
I wanted to comment on what Roger just said, and I do agree that what I see as Roger's distinction between a common piece of knowledge, and the example that he gave was, a ball, rolling down a hill or something like that. But there are other examples that come to my mind, and they're examples of conventional social behavior. We get on a road and we navigate the road with many, many other drivers. We go into a restaurant and order something. There are all these public situations in which we know how to act, and we act on the basis of kind of commonly understood narratives or scripts. And so you have that on the one hand, and then you have the other kinds of situations that Roger talked about in terms of, the humanitarian situations, politics and things like that are different, where you don't have that common ground. And so I agree there, but I think what would be interesting at some point to delve into is what Roger thinks grounds the common ground. What is the basis? What is it that makes it possible to have that common understanding? In his example, it has to do with an explanation within physics. So he would, he might say, well, yes, I mean, there's an agreement among individuals as to what's going on there. But I'm suspecting he would want to dig further and say it's not just a matter of convention, but there's something about the way in which we can gain purchase on the real world, independent of our interaction with it, that ultimately grounds this stability in our understanding. And that kind of sort of a I'll call it a foundational or sovereign explanation. I mean, I prefer to call it truth with a small t rather than a giant T, because I suspect Roger would not want to argue for some sort of grand metaphysical truths. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm assuming that he'd say, no, we're talking about T with a small t. It's approximate and it's continuously evolving, but nevertheless, we're able to gain purchase. We're able to anchor this common ground within something external to us. And I wanted to bring that back to, the example of polarization, political polarization. So, say a progressive is trying to have a discussion with somebody who is, has their allegiance to MAGA or, something like that. And, it was both, Ron and, someone else said, they tried to have those conversations in the past, and then the people they were talking to just got angry. And Roger said, well, that's that anger that gets in the way. You almost have no choice. If you're being confronted with that anger, you just have to walk away. But I think that this is where I think we have to examine how we're understanding, first of all, the relationship between something like anger and a point of view. Or fact and value. So Roger made a distinction between what is a fact and what is a value. And I don't know if he's aware of that. That's a very contentious point within philosophy, that there are a whole group, there's a whole orientation within philosophy, which argues that you cannot separate fact from value. But I would argue in the same way, you cannot separate emotion from fact. And what I mean by this is, if the anger of that person, that rage which we trigger, we press the wrong button when we're having that discussion with that person who's advocating for a right-wing position, if that rage is an assessment, and it's to say it's an expression of a point of view, the anger is their outraged disagreement, then rather than viewing the anger as a kind of a descent on their part into incoherence or irrationality, if we view that anger as they're responding to what they're sensing in us, specifically a kind of a defensiveness on our part, then we have to examine what is it that we're sending out to them, which is causing them to need to be angry. Now, I've had these conversations too with MAGA, and I've tried it from different points of view. The easiest point of view is one where I have a certain kind of a self-righteousness that which is fairly subtle. I'm recognizing it. It's that I know my point of view is the better one. It's the correct one. And that comes through loud and clear, even if I try and veil it a little bit. And the response I'll get on their part is anger and defensiveness. Then I shift my tactic to say, to one which lets that person know, which demonstrates to them, which does the hard work, because they're going to be very skeptical and suspicious that I'm ever going to show them that I can understand where they're coming from their perspective. Whenever I've done the difficult and careful work and patient work to demonstrate to them, that I understand where they're coming from, not only do they not respond with anger, but they respond with surprise, relief, empathy, and a certain warmth, especially among conservatives, often who tend to be more traditional, and their communities often are very tightly knit, based on those common values. So let me throw the question back: what is it that I would argue it's those very suppositions that we hold that ground our notion of common ground in sovereign or foundational notions of truth, like separating fact from value, assuming that, but in that conversation, that when we're dealing with an issue of fact, let's say that we're talking with somebody, let's say that Roger is talking with somebody, he's talking with 10 people about that ball rolling down the hill, and 9 out of 10, as soon as he makes clear to them, which is important, he has to make clear to them the context in which he's looking for a particular kind of answer, because they may not know, right? He has a particular context in mind, which is that of physics. Well, that's his subject. It may not be theirs, so he has to cue them into that, and then they'll respond 9 out of 10 of them, perhaps, with the answer he's looking for, because they all learned it in school. But maybe the 10th of them may have an oddball response. Maybe they studied phenomenology, and and by studying Husserl, they learned, well, the idea of a ball as a self-consistent thing that undergoes motion is an abstraction. It's an idealization. So and because they really learned that lesson well from Husserl, they don't actually look at a ball that way. They bracket those idealizations, and they actually see it in a more fundamental way, such that they wouldn't describe it in those terms anymore. And Roger might respond, well, because he believes in a foundational or a sovereign notion of what the common knowledge concerning that ball. If that person deviates from it, he's going to assume that they're incorrect, that they have an incorrect knowledge somewhere along the line. So he's going to be making use of that way of looking at it, that there's some sort of a external third person perspective that he can bring to bear. And it's precisely that perspective which will cause the anger and the defensiveness. Because in that case, by bringing in the third person perspective, the view from somewhere other than the person that they're dealing with in that interaction, he's basically not paying attention to what really needs to be paid attention to in order to understand how we really, where common knowledge emerges from. It emerges from, and no place else than from the actual circumstances of our engagement with other people, in which, yes, there can be synchrony or more or less, or alienation, but these are all variations on this continuous interaction, which is, creatively, bonding us, but it's also always introducing novelty into our interactions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you. Very interesting. Okay, folks. That was very, very interesting. Everybody gave some very interesting thoughts here, which I shall, of course, think about. I think always about what you say to what I say, and I think it's good that we all listen to each other. In any case, I will see you all next month, and in the meantime, be well, everybody, and as they say, be happy.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.